This is a podcast about new crops. You're going to love it. Join us on The Cutting Edge, a podcast in search of new crops for Wisconsin.
There were no barriers. I have never seen this with any other crop that I have tried to get farmers to grow. It just seemed, the view was there's no barriers because ultimately there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Welcome to Cutting Edge, a podcast in search of new crops for Wisconsin. I'm your co-host, Jerry Clark, with the University of Wisconsin-Madison Extension in Chippewa County, serving as an agricultural agent. Today we'll be talking about industrial hemp. My co-host today is Carl Dooley in Buffalo County.
Thanks, Jerry, and I'm Carl Dooley. I'm the UW Extension Buffalo County ag agent. And it's a real pleasure today to have for our very first podcast special guest, Dr. Heather Darby. Dr. Darby is a professor with University of Vermont Extension Agronomy Specialist. And I think with that, Heather, we would like give us a little bit of your background and throw a little bit of the Wisconsin twist in there for us.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks for having me on your show today. I'm really excited. So I'm actually a Vermont native. I grew up here, and so I'm really proud of that. But I would say my second home is Wisconsin. I'm a UW alumni. I got my master's at the University of Wisconsin, so spent about 3 years there, and was really fortunate enough to be able to travel the entire state. So I had some research plots at 7 locations. So when I was there, I really got to see the whole state, which was nice, and even made it way up to Ashland. I don't know if the research station is still up there, but I had some plots that far north.
Yeah,
I believe that's closed. Yep.
Yeah. Well, so it was a while ago when I was there, but yeah. So I have a connection to the Midwest, and my my husband's family lives in Iowa too. So it's a place that we get to go a lot and visit. So I do consider it a second home. Yeah. And as far as what I do here in Vermont, I'm at UVM, the University of Vermont. I do a lot of different things here, and but hemp is one of them. So that's why I'm the special guest today.
Well, we should start a little background on your research with industrial hemp, Heather.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've been working or researching industrial hemp since 2015, I believe, or 16. I guess 15. And I've been excited about working with hemp. I think, like probably many people on this, listening to new crops, I'm excited about new crops too. There's just a level of excitement working with something new that we don't know a lot about. And so when we were, afforded the opportunity to work with hemp, I jumped right on it immediately, worked my way through all the bureaucracies associated with that, and put my first research plots in the ground. I guess it must have been 2016. And so we've been working on grain research, fiber, a little bit of fiber research, and then also over the last, I guess it'll be 3 years now, flower research, or hemp for CBD, which has become the popular hemp product lately.
And Heather, can you just explain a little bit about the physiology of industrial hemp and how that's the differences between what you would do maybe for grain, fiber production, and CBD?
Yeah, so industrial hemp, I think everyone knows that it has very, very low levels of THC. So that's why we're allowed to grow that as a crop now. And if we're growing hemp, or if you're growing hemp, you should know that there's both male and female plants. I think that's that's really a big piece of understanding hemp, which is different than a lot of the crops that we work with. Corn, as an example, has male and female parts on the same plant, but hemp itself has male plants and female plants. So if you want to make seed, obviously you need both. You need male and female plants. So you grow them both. If you want to produce hemp for flower, so you're just harvesting the female flower bud, you definitely don't want any males around. And so if you're growing for grain, you're growing both male and female plants, and also for fiber. And if you're growing for flower, then you're only growing female plants. And you definitely don't want any of those pesky male plants around, because, when you're growing for flower, for female flower, that's all you want. You're really looking to harvest the female flowers that are really high in these cannabinoids, or CBD as an example. I know a lot of listeners probably hear about that cannabinoid the most. And so if it does become seedy, quote unquote, the level of those cannabinoids goes down considerably. So if you're really trying to meet that market with high cannabinoids and things like CBD, you definitely don't want any male plants. So that's probably one of the primary pieces of hemp physiology that people need to know about. One other, I would say, is the fact that most hemp that people are growing is photoperiod sensitive, which means that when the day length changes, the plant moves from vegetative to reproductive. And so that obviously has implications when you're growing the crop. So those are probably the two biggest physiological pieces that people should know about.
So what are you seeing as far as that marketing picture for that, whether it's for the oils or for the grain fiber market that growers might be interested in growing industrial hemp?
Yeah, well, things are a lot different than they were a year ago. I'm sure you folks have noticed that in Wisconsin too. The buzz of making millions off from hemp has gone away. We're not sort of seeing that gold rush mentality right now. So the market is really different than it was a year ago. So let's start with hemp flower. So again, hemp flower is the female flower buds that are harvested, and they're harvested to be processed into primarily CBD at this point, but also CBG, which is another cannabinoid. And the market for that has declined quite considerably, at least the pay price. It's still actually a good price per acre. It's not $40,000 return per acre that was being projected last year, but it's still a good return per acre, well over $1,000. But, that's if you have someone to sell it to. So the market prices for biomass, which is basically just harvesting some leaves and stems and female flower, and that's taken and the CBD is extruded out of it and then sold. You got to connect with a market, because even though the price is decent, if you don't have anyone that's going to buy it from you, I think we all know it doesn't matter. So the price is still good, but finding a market is challenging because the processing side of this equation is growing slowly. So the capacity to handle the hemp that's being grown right now is pretty limited. And I'm sure it's that way in Wisconsin too. It's that way in Vermont and many, many places. The market for dried high quality flower for smoking. So some people will smoke the flower bud to get the CBD effects, which again are not psychoactive at all, but some people use it to manage pain. stress, anxiety, things like that. So people do roll and smoke it, similar to tobacco. That market is very good. That's still at $250 up to $400 per dried pound of flower. So that market is holding strong. But again, you have to be able to connect with somebody who can process and distribute that smokable flower. So finding the market outlet for your crop is critical, or else, really don't bother growing it, because especially for flower, because the quality just doesn't hold up over time if you're not set up to handle it, which most people aren't.
And Heather, isn't that,
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt, but isn't that
No.
probably the most labor intensive one too, the flower? There's not a lot of mechanization in the flower industry.
Yeah,
Right?
but even with the labor involved, if you have the labor force, it's still, it actually still can generate a return. But yes, absolutely, that's the one that's still largely hand harvested. I think last year, probably in Wisconsin too, I saw some of your innovations. People are innovating to harvest mechanically, but that's for biomass, right? So biomass is kind of lower grade, I would say. They don't care if you break this, the buds and, mash up everything. But for smokable flower, which is still, gaining that higher price, that's going to be more finely handled, manicured, stored, all of that. Yeah.
So what about the grain and fiber market then? Do you see it growing in the Northeast or across the country at this point?
So, yeah, I mean, on a very small scale, right? So most of the markets that we have right now are, I don't want to call them boutique necessarily, but very local, locally produced products that are coming out the door. So the markets aren't huge. We're not talking yet about big commodity sales of thousands of acres of grain crop, because on the more industrial level, again, the processing and the value chains to bring this stuff to market have not been set up. So, we're so anxious in agriculture to have something new, maybe something that can make us some money. We're way ahead of the processing and distribution side of things. So it's growing very slowly. You're probably
Heather,
seeing the same thing, I'm sure.
Yeah, just to clarify, we've got the cannabinoids that are pulled out of the flower part of the plant, or it could be the whole plant in general. Yep. If it's lower grade. But then we can also get oil out of the seed, correct?
Yeah.
There's something there too.
Very different though. So I think that's where people get confused. So the oil that comes out of the seed, so hemp is an oil seed, and very similar to canola, let's say, or sunflower or flax. I would say it's probably a little bit more closer to the oil you would get out of flaxseed. Okay. So it's very high quality, very nutritious, has a lot of omega-3s in it. It doesn't have any THC in it. It doesn't have those cannabinoids. So it's used for very different purposes. It's not necessarily considered, I guess, like a nutraceutical or a herbal supplement or anything like that. Hemp oil is used like very minor for cooking. Again, it's used more as a health supplement for a lot of people, a protein source. So it would be used similar to flaxseed oil. We don't cook with flaxseed oil. We put it in little capsules and take it to supplement our diets.
What about the meal that's left over after the processing of the oil? Do they use that for, I understand they use some of that for flour. Is it a possible livestock feed? But I don't think that's approved yet, right?
I don't think it's approved yet. Yeah, it's not in Vermont. But yeah, so again, I always think about flaxseed meal, right? And hemp meal is very similar. Could be used with really similar, like my husband puts it on sprinkles it on his oatmeal in the morning. So, again, it's still got a lot of goodness in it, a little bit more fiber. So it's used in baking. When we say flour, it's not a traditional flour. You're not going to really want to make an entire cake out of it or anything, but it's still got a good amount of protein in it and fiber. So people use it when they're cooking. We use it as a fertilizer. It's a really good fertility source.
Mommy, I'm gonna
If
go to the bathroom.
Yep. Sorry, that's my son. This is a real podcast, folks,
You
right?
bet.
We're doing this because we're in a
This is live.
pandemic. Yeah. We've been actually trialing the hemp seed meal as a fertility source. It's got a lot of protein, which means it has a good amount of nitrogen in it, and it breaks down really quickly in the soil, more quickly than some of the other, like soybean meal as an example. So it may not be the highest value product to gain from it, but a good way to return that back to the ground and get some fertility out of it for sure.
What about, have you guys gone anywhere with fiber in Vermont yet or in the Northeast?
It feels like people are continually trying. We get called regularly from businesses that are trying to get started. We have a business recently that's trying to turn the fiber into paper to replace some of these, cups, like coffee cups and things like that. But nothing substantial yet. Nothing substantial. And I would say that's pretty similar around the Northeast. So not a whole lot yet.
I know
I think
here in Wisconsin, we've had some discussions with a couple of our other university institutions about the paper industry and also some processing equipment. But unfortunately, that was early March when those conversations started, and kind of everything's on hold right now, of course. But even in Canada, the fiber hasn't taken off too much yet, has it?
No, I think they're big capital investments. And not beyond that, stiff competition, right? So, I mean, there's other sources, synthetic and natural for fiber that are already set up in place. So these kind of big capital intensive investments aren't moving as fast as I think we'd all like to see. Yeah.
One other product you hear a lot about is hempcrete. You guys doing anything with hempcrete out there?
There's a little bit of movement with hempcrete. Again, no manufacturing facilities yet, but a lot of people, kind of going around trying to figure out how to make it happen. It's a more expensive building product. So again, that's, part of the limitation. Even though we can probably make these things, there might be in some, people that want to invest in it. Ultimately, will that more expensive product at this point have a spot in the marketplace enough to warrant the investment? And I think, that's what everybody's trying to figure out. So those will, I think, be some of the last things to come for hemp.
So maybe just a little bit, I know some of your first studies, you did some seeding rate trials and things like that. If you want to could you just talk a little bit about what you found on seeding rate for grain and fiber?
Well, so one of the things I think, if folks are interested in growing hemp, this is a big take-home message, I would say, is that the seed itself is the emerging seedling is really, really sensitive to like compacted, crusted soils. And also the seed itself, when you buy it, tends to have pretty low germ rates. So when you're planning your seeding rate, those are two pieces you really need to be thinking about. So first, you want to make sure that you adjust your seeding rate based on the actual germination rate that's listed on the bag of seed. So if the seed's only 80% germ, and I tell you today you should be seeding at 20 pounds of seed per acre, that means you need to be planting more than 20 pounds. You need to account for that low germ. Otherwise, you're going to be disappointed when you watch the crop come out of the ground. So that's one thing.
Heather, could I,
Yeah.
since we talked about seed a little bit there, can we, where do you look at for finding the highest quality seed right now? Some people refer to it kind of like, hey, it's the Wild West out there, but
Yeah.
What do you recommend for looking to find that high quality seed?
Yeah, well, so if you're growing for grain or fiber, there are some very well-established companies already in Canada, and they now have distribution into the United States. And so it's pretty easy to get what I would say is like higher quality and also better genetics for grain and fiber. So there's companies like Hemp Genetics International, HGI. They're distributing, at least through King's AgriSeed as one. There's other companies I'm sure as well. They're located in Pennsylvania. And then Seedway, which is kind of a more local company here. They're distributing Uni Seeds, UNI Seeds, and that's coming out of Ontario. I like the Ontario varieties better for where we are because they're adapted to that kind of temperate climate, where a lot of the seed coming out of the western part of Canada is, has been bred and developed in a drier conditions. So I think you've worked with those, Carl and Jerry, and you've seen that they're pretty short. They don't, they're not putting on that tall growth. And so there's some weed, can be some weed issues there.
Yeah, you brought up a good point, Heather, about talking about where the climate differences, and it's one of the reasons, besides you being an excellent researcher and extension person, the climate at your research station at Rogers Farm is really, really similar to what we deal with here in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So that's why I point a lot of people towards your data because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's, I mentioned weeds. I know a lot of people have had challenges establishing good stands of grain and fiber. And again, this gets back to the seed quality, but it also gets back to soil quality. Because again, that little hemp seedling hates crusted soil. And so making sure you have excellent soil conditions when you're planting hemp is just really critical, because otherwise, you can lose up to 40% of the seed that you put in the ground. So I know in Canada, they actually account for that in their seeding rate. So they're not only accounting for germ, the germ rate that's listed on the bag, but they're also accounting for a 30% mortality loss on top of that. So you can see how that 20 pound per acre seeding rate can be up towards 50 by the time you make all these adjustments. So, these are really important considerations, because if you don't get a good stand of hemp, you're gonna have weeds. You can't, and if you get a good stand of hemp, the hemp will easily outcompete the weeds.
Yeah,
But you gotta have a solid stand.
Yeah, we mowed off half of our plots last year because the weeds just destroyed it. And I think part of ours is that we've been planting too early. What do you guys look at for planting date or planting conditions or weather conditions before?
Yeah, so we have done some planting date studies, and really the end result was it depends. It depends on the weather. So hemp can actually be planted when it's relatively cold, but it's really about the soil moisture, and also about the conditions on each side of planting. So it's so hard to predict the weather these days. But what I've been told by farmers in Canada is just be patient. And, you have a pretty decent window for planting hemp that can go from mid-May really to about mid-June. And so finding that sweet spot for planting is really when, you have a, pretty decent amount of moisture to go out and plant, but not too wet. And you're not expecting, some deluge in the next week. And I think that's what's been challenging for you folks as well as us. Our springs have been really pretty tough the last few years. So it's been hard even in that window to find a time to get out there. So I would say bump up your seeding rate, if conditions are poor.
I know last year we struggled a little bit. Jerry, what was our planting date last year? Do you recall? It was
Chippewa County, we planted June 11th. So
Yeah,
we were
not too bad. Yeah.
And we're actually hoping to plant, right after Memorial Day this year. So maybe a week or two earlier.
And I think our planting date was right around June 15th here in Buffalo County, about a week later. And it germinated really well. Then it got cold and it just sat there and the weeds took off. And one of our colleagues, Dr. Brian Luck down in Madison, planted a trial at Arlington. And because he wasn't able to get the seed in time, he didn't plant till the 25th of June. And his crop was amazing compared to ours. So
I will say that it is pretty, it likes the heat, and once the heat units pick up, it grows really fast. So, it is like some other crops where you need to manage those weeds on the front end a bit. And I know, I don't know what, the sort of regulations are, but in Wisconsin, but we do have farms that do some pre-plant herbicide applications with things like trifluralin, products like that, basically, that help to take care of some of the weeds before they're going to go in and plant other crops. We do that with canola and hemp and things like that. So that can help on the front end, and then that gives the hemp a little bit of time to kind of get established, up and going before all the rest of the weeds kick in.
So as a new grower, how would you get started? What's your advice for someone that's wanting to make the money and thinks this is the way to go?
Yeah, well, I would tell them to first start searching out a reputable market. I don't, we had a lot of issues, I'm sure you did too, last year, with people that even had contracts with buyers, and then the buyers folded before they even got to harvest. Or, once we got to harvest, the buyers realized the price had dropped substantially, so then wanted to change their contracts, So everybody was in this real learning mode. And I don't necessarily think that any of the buyers were shysters or, trying to, to do bad things. But, the market fell apart. People didn't even know what they were getting into, farmers and processors for the most part. So now I feel like things are settling out a bit. There have been people in the business for more than a year, a couple, 2, 3 years in some cases. So to start searching out, especially if you're a new grower, a market that might be more stable with a more reputable buyer. Someone that maybe other farmers in the area have also been selling to. So they have a little bit of a track record, and that's where I would start. I wouldn't definitely go out and put 50 acres in thinking they were going to sell it at the end of the season.
Yeah, that seemed to be the questions we were getting last year here with Extension in Wisconsin was, I've got 30 acres, I want to grow hemp. And it was like, whoa, back off. Do you have a market? Do you know what you're getting yourself into? You kind of had this list of questions, not to talk them out of it, but to make sure they knew exactly what they were getting into. And there was a big difference between whether they were going to try to grow it for grain and fiber, which maybe a farmer did have a drill or, some of the equipment to do that, but growing it for the cannabinoids, that's a whole different ballgame, because it's more like, I'd like to look at it as gardening, so to speak, because if you've got an individual plant and you're doing more mechanic or, weed control is much different, and you're trying to treat each plant separately or individually, so to speak. But those are the questions I think we got was, I've got this acreage, I want to do this. And you had to make sure they were going into it with their eyes open because of these challenges you just explained. Yeah,
but there was the allure of money, Jerry. Mm-hmm. I mean,
yes.
I mean, you've worked with a lot of specialty crops, and so have I. And I have never seen anything like this, where it didn't really matter. There were no barriers, right? There were
Right.
no barriers. Even when you put up the barriers for the farmers, they still did it anyway. They bought black plastic mulch layers, and they figured out how to irrigate, and they were paying this like exorbitant amount of money for plants, and there were no barriers. I have never seen this with any other crop that I have tried to get farmers to grow. It just, the view was there's no barriers because ultimately there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So, I think it's a real interesting lesson learned on a lot of levels. Like if we want farmers to diversify, tell them there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It was just crazy. I've never, ever seen anything like that. I'm sure it was the same for you. Market, no market.
Yeah.
Just, they did it. So we can grow hemp. We know that now.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's the way we've approached it here with some of the trials that we've done. This will be our second year of a research project here in Chippewa County with UW-Madison. And I think we've proven that, you can grow this stuff. Now, let's put that aside. You got to have a marketing plan and go forward with what you're going to do and go into it knowing this is a cost of production. Like you said, I think people just thought the money was going to kind of just show up, but you've got a lot of inputs before you can even have any kind of return on it.
Yeah, I remember talking to some dairy farmers last year that wanted to do this. And I said, it's a lot of work and it's going to cost a lot of money. And they said, well, dairy farming is a lot of work and I'm losing money every day, so it was worth the risk for people.
Yes.
Or they thought that it would be worth the risk. And for some people it was, some people did come out the other end smiling, and a lot of people didn't. So.
Sure.
And there was a lot of excitement, which we haven't seen in agriculture, in recent years. So
right.
not as much excitement this year, but and Jerry and I have had this conversation with some of our colleagues that maybe we're in a good spot right now as far as extension people, researchers, that with the grain and fiber, at least we have a little time now. We have a couple of years to really get a good handle on this. And how to grow it, what are the barriers, and then maybe some of our colleagues who are in market research have a little bit of time to go ahead and get the research done before we plant thousands of acres again without markets. So.
Yeah, I do think it's definitely an exciting time, I think, for the researchers, because we do have the opportunity to set the stage, to think about how we're going to grow this crop economically, sustainably, environmentally. We're not trying to get people to change the way they're growing something. We're leading, hopefully, the way, saying, these are the best practices. And that to me is exciting. We haven't been there for a while, so it's good.
And I had a chance last summer I took the chance to go to Germany to their European Industrial Hemp Conference, and you mentioned the word sustainable, and that word was used constantly at this conference. What's your viewpoint on hemp as this, quote, sustainable crop?
Yeah, well, I think people definitely tout hemp as being, like some people, the savior, but with any crop, I think we can do a really good job growing it to both produce, good yields, quality, and protect the environment, or we can do a really bad job at that. And hemp's no different. Hemp's not just going to be environmentally friendly. We have to grow it in a way that it will be, and the potential for it to have less inputs, let's say, is there, but it's not a given. It's not a crop that grows without fertilizer. We already know that. It's not a crop that grows without herbicides. We already know that. And so can it be? Well, definitely it can be a really great crop in a rotation with the other crops that we grow, so that we can, reduce inputs and have reduced herbicides and all of those great things. but it's not a given. It's not a definite. And that's why I said it's exciting, because we have the opportunity right now to set the stage so that it does become a crop that has a lot of benefits to the farmer, and other crops and the environment and so on and so forth.
Good point. I know in Buffalo County, we tried to, the last 2 years, we put in some under no-till conditions and with very, very mixed results. One because of weed control. So the whole idea is sustainable in our hillsides in western Wisconsin. There's a question mark there. We have to practice some or learn some new practices before I would consider like an erosion control crop.
Yeah.
Things like that, so.
Right. Exactly. Yep. Yeah. So we have some work to do, but I do think, there's some definite benefits to growing the crop. But it does take fertilizer, it's very similar to corn in a lot of ways, from that perspective. And I did a historical, analysis of hemp in New England. And, the colonists did not want to grow hemp. Even when the government tried to subsidize them, way back early on, they wouldn't grow it because it took too much from the land. That's what it says in these very old historical documents. So, they wanted to grow something else like flax because it was, much easier on the soil. So, I think it can go right and it can go wrong, just like everything that we do. So we have this task right now and the opportunity to make it go right.
Yeah, that's what we learned in Chippewa County was the inputs of we did a nitrogen trial here. And yes, absolutely. It turned out, 80 to 100 pounds of nitrogen was needed at a minimum. That was kind of that sweet spot somewhere in there, depending on soil type and, the previous crop was soybeans, so we got a little bit of credit, some of that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's not an input free crop at that point.
Yeah.
So do you have any advice as far as some of the harvesting? I know we talked a lot of production type of stuff, but we get to that harvest point of whether it's for the cannabinoids or we look at harvesting for grain and fiber. What's your experience on those sides, Heather?
Yeah, well, so fiber, so it depends. Okay, so for grain, I think this is where a lot of farmers run into issues, is because most of the grain that we're used to harvesting looks really brown and dead when we go out to harvest it, so it's naturally, when would you harvest hemp for grain? When it's brown and dead. But that is not what you should do. You actually harvest hemp when it's still very green and leafy, but the seed is ripe. And that goes against, our farming fabric, right? It's like everything we know says wait. And I think that's where people run into trouble with the wrapping, so if you wait too long, there's a change in the fiber of the hemp plant as it becomes more mature. So what I believe happens is the pectin that holds the outside bast fibers starts to break down. And once that starts to happen, when you're combining, the stems start to break and then they start to get wrapped up in the combine. So the harvest window isn't a long period of time. It actually is fairly short, and it's pretty predictable because it is a photoperiod sensitive crop. So, for most places, we're talking about the end of August, just past Labor Day. So you can always count on it roughly being harvested around the same time. So that's a big challenge, is just tooling the way you look at things. The other challenge I would say is making sure you have a way to clean it, because you're harvesting green material. There's a ton of leaves and hulls that are in the seed, and so you have to have a way to dry it rapidly, but not with too much heat, or else you'll burn things up, or get it cleaned and in a dryer. So, to me, that's a step that people have figured out the hard way.
Yeah, and when you mentioned cleaning and drying, you got to do that rapidly is the
Yeah.
key word, because in a couple hours,
Oh, yeah.
I found out it'll start to mold already, and your product is total waste. So it's
Yep.
you really have to get on the ball. To me, it was a little bit similar to canola, because you always have some green seed in canola, and you got to get air on it right now, and
Yeah.
that I would really emphasize that you have to get.
Yeah.
You have to.
It's
get air
actually
on it.
easier to dry it and then clean it. Trying to clean it first, and if you had a big rotary screen cleaner, it probably would work okay. But it's gummy. It's way more gummy than you got, because you still have all those oils and terpenes all over that plant. And so when you put it through a regular seed cleaner, oh my gosh, what a mess. So you're better off if you can get air on it and dry those hulls down and then put it through a cleaner. But it depends, I guess, what kind of equipment you have.
So on the cannabinoid side, that's not combine. That's more hand harvested at this point for the most part, and then individually flowers harvested.
Yeah, that's go out into the field and cut the plants down, break them down. They look like little trees, so you have to cut the stems off, or the branches, and then you cut the stems off the branches and pull off the big leaves, and very labor intensive, depending on how fine you're going to process it. For that smokable flower bud, we're talking 2 to 4 hours, maybe 5 hours per plant. And if you're harvesting for biomass, you may be looking at 5 minutes a plant, but still it's quite a bit of it's all hand labor for the most part. So why should we grow hemp?
yeah. What do you, I was going to state that a little bit, maybe easier. What do you think the future
Softer.
is? Yes.
Well,
Where do
we
you see
do.
the future?
Well, I mean, at least in Vermont, and this is Vermont, of course, we're small. We're not going to grow big commodity crops of hemp, not here. We don't do anything that way. So for us, it's really going to be those kind of value added, local, high quality, specialty markets that our farmers are already going for. We have some very well established hemp companies in Vermont. Sun Soil is one of them. They've been here since 2014. And they're one of the biggest and most reputable CBD businesses in the country right now. And I will say that they're still only growing 50 acres. So, I think there's still opportunities. There's still products coming out the door, but our excitement is ahead of where all of that is right now. So, what I see are farmers that are still in it, know that there will be more opportunities coming, all the time. And so, people connecting and continuing to connect and network is where I think people should be at right now. I do feel like the opportunities are going to continue to come. This isn't going to go away. It's not a fly by night thing. But the crop has been legal for what, a year, really? We can't expect the entire infrastructure to be set up to process everything that we want to do.
Well, Heather, this has been great to touch base this way, I think, and hopefully at some point in time we can all get together in person again in our lives, and maybe we can venture out and come to your field day and vice versa, and share in our research projects. Jerry, any last questions, comments that you might have?
No, I think, thank you, Heather, for joining us on our initial Cutting Edge podcast today. Appreciate your time. And like Carl said, hope we see you down the road.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate it. And have a great growing season.
This has been The Cutting Edge, a podcast in search of new crops for Wisconsin, brought to you by the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension.